So I took him and one of his friends and discovered that not only did Romeo know all the myths, but he also could write like hell, which leads to where I'll get in a minute. But so I took him to see Orlando because I thought if anybody could help a young person in a situation like he was facing, because he could be facing very serious jail time. He was charged with assault and robbery, even though he did neither. And they really wanted to find out from him the name of his friend, so they could go after the friend. And that's what it was all about, clearly. But you know, he was still he was out on bail, but he was going to have to go through the whole trial process. So I took him out to see Orland. And Orland, I jotted down a lot of things that Orland said to him that day. One of it was, how do you become the director of your life now? These 18 years of your life is time served. What does it mean to you to have lived this way? What does it mean to you to consider the fact that certain things about that time have to end? All the conflicts, the excuses, you've got to make a list of what has to end, because that's what the rite of passage is about. Psychologically, you now have to be prepared to discipline yourself and not have other people have to discipline you. Later he said, I'll tell you something about anger. It's most often expressed not in the street, but at home, with people who have some degree of power over someone else, a parent over a child. If you don't deal with it, that's just the reality. The people who are often most hurt are people who share their time, the most time together. Prison is actually more controlled. Everybody knows if you piss somebody off, what's going to happen. In the home, people think because they share love, it's going to be okay to take the risk. But you, to Romeo, better deal with your anger, because your child is going to do something that's going to trigger it. He said the part you have to prepare for is going to trial. The critical thing about trial is it is a trial. It's going to push you to your limits of your fear, your doubt, your relationships, your commitments. It's going to push you to the edge of all of that. That's what a trial is for, the truth. Can you face the truth? Can you face the uncertainty? Can you face the darkness of what they're going to try to put on you? Even face the lies that people are going to want to tell about you. Before you even worry about serving time, the trial is the hardest part of all this. And then he talked about public defenders, because that's what he had. Couldn't afford a lawyer. He said a public defender is a real lawyer. They want to believe in the person, and so you got to help that process. And they've won cases that are very complex based on the relationship that developed with their clients. They become inspired because, wow, this is a real case. It's not just another number, not just another statistic, but only you can change that. So that was incredible advice, I thought. And at the end, to my surprise, Orland took Romeo and myself into another room and did a ritual with us. Beautiful, beautiful, powerful ritual. Afterwards, I'll never forget Romeo going into the other room, sitting back down on the couch and saying, I feel so calm. I've never felt this calm in my entire life. I went to the restroom at this point. When I came back, Orland was looking at Romeo with this look of astonishment on his face. And he said, I knew something had happened. I didn't know what it was. And he said, I've never heard anybody make that reference that you made just now. And Romeo had looked at him and said, do you know who Ochosi is? Ochosi is the West African Yoruba god of justice. And Romeo had learned about this god through studying mythology. But he'd also learned about it because when he was very young, as he told me later, he'd been facing a very serious charge in juvenile detention. And his sister had told him about this god and said, you know, this is the god of justice. And if you're put in jail or in detention for something that you didn't do, then, and you don't deserve to go to whatever, prison for it, this god will intervene. And Romeo had felt the god come into the room when he was there with Orland. He did. He prayed to the god Ochosi, and he didn't have to serve time in detention. And he felt the god come into the room again as he stood there with Orland, which was a very good sign. So when the pretrial hearing happened, I wasn't able to be there. I had taken my son to West Africa, to Burkina Faso with melanoma, to go through an incredible month of a healing ritual for my son's mental problems, which I would just say miraculously worked. It's not Western medicine that is the answer necessarily to, in fact, often it's not the answer to these kinds of problems. But going through something like that with Franklin's mother, who is still a very close friend of mine, My son is biracial, he's part African-American, part Caucasian. And what we went through together is a long, long story, which I'm gonna write about now for the updated edition of this book. But anyway, the point being, I came back, I couldn't be at the pretrial with Romeo. And what happened was that they ended up, the judge looked at the video, saw that Romeo had not done anything to warrant what was certainly not going to jail. And the store owner was there and saw the video too, and saw that Romeo didn't do anything either. And so the judge said, case dismissed. And in the hallway, Romeo told me the story of how he had gone up to the store owner and apologized. Said, we never intended for things to go as far as they did that day, and we're sorry, I'm sorry. And the store owner just burst into tears. So, as Romeo later said, he felt like Ochosi had his back. So that was an incredible thing, and the latest, I guess, well, I want to just do a couple more things. I won't have time to talk about the youth retreat, but so I then also sat down with Orland, and he talked to me about mentorship. And I will say that I think that, as Reverend Leon said earlier, that the key really to good mentorship, as far as I'm concerned, is listening. You know, I've so often found that if I just, and Romeo's not the only young man that I've mentored now, there are others, but he is the one I'm closest to. And you know, so many times, I mean, the world that he lives in is crisis to crisis. I mean, it is just a constant, you know, bombardment of things that I never know what's going to happen next myself, and he never knows either. And you know, sometimes he just has got to get it off his chest, and so he'll call me and just talk, and I'll just listen. And sometimes I have something to say, and sometimes I don't. But it's really not about advice. You know, it's not that I have such authority that I can really tell him, you know, what's the important thing to do. That's not it. It's just someone being there, someone being able to receive and let you vent. You know, there's people talk about the rescue mentality too of especially a white liberal walking into this situation, I guess. And that's something I've had to wrestle with and think about, and but realize that ultimately, you know, it comes down to love. And I have come to love him and he me, and we're not ashamed to tell each other that.
Me too, Dave.
And we've been through a lot of stuff. My life is very different because I know him and these other young men that I've been privileged really to get to know. And I've learned a lot too about the foster care system. He's a product of the foster care system, so is his girlfriend, criminal justice system. And someday we're going to write a book together about it. And they've got people who are willing to talk to me about the things that go on in there that nobody really knows about, and I would never know about without this situation. So I hope to use my investigative reporter instincts on that as well. But I want to just share a few things that Erland told me, because they were really, he said that the critical thing about mentorship is it's supposed to build the capacity of the will, transitioning the knowledge that you have to them, but the knowledge is will structured, inward, how to get things done. If they're not practicing doing it and sustaining it, then the mentorship gets frustrated. You can't sustain it. He also said in the crisis, there's always a pulling, and when a crisis happens, you have to make sure you're not being pulled by the forces into something that you can't control, but you're trying to pull them out of something so that they can be in more control of the situation that they're engaged in. Mentorship is really critical that it has to be a kind of divination, a kind of sensing what is the need and can I bridge that to the degree that it becomes their responsibility. So it's not I'm constantly doing it for them, but they're doing it for themselves. It's a teaching space, a learning space, a developmental space, and it's a commitment space. What mentorship goes after, because this is Athena, love, wisdom of the soul. You see the genius, and you see the future of that, and then your heart connects to that. But that's a divine inspiration. It's not just personal choice. As you get to know the story behind the person's genius, there's this whole other thing playing out with all these other demons and all kinds of forces that are not just good. So it's both things. And, you know, but the genius is, of course, what one seeks to cultivate and help bring out. And I was at a conference last April, almost a year ago now, at Pacifica, around James Hillman, who is an amazing psychologist, depth psychologist, no longer alive, but his biographer, as Reverend Leon said. And anyway, I met at the conference a guy named Craig Chalquist, who was starting a new mythological journal called Imminence in San Francisco. And so I was telling him a little about Romeo, and he said, he's interested in mythology. He said, can he write? I said, yeah, I think he can. He says, well, if he'd like to write a piece for the first issue about how mythology shaped his life, we'd like to run it. So they did. He did, and they did. It's an amazing piece, and I have a few copies of it here, which I can give to folks afterwards if you're interested. And now I took him up to Pacifica. It's a graduate institute in Santa Barbara, and he met the head of the school, Steve Eisenstadt, and what can I say? He knocked him out enough that they invited him to speak on this storytelling panel at a conference in June, so we're looking forward to that. And so I don't know, I'm not telling this story to toot my own horn, and hopefully you've got something of what mentoring is about from what I've said, but it's I do want to introduce Romeo and let him speak. I've heard him speak at ECHO meetings and at Inside Out Writers and like that, but I'm interested to hear what he has to say for a minute today. And so I think with that, and I'll also give you information afterwards if you're interested about a schooling initiative that we're starting, my wife and I, and Joan Jekyll is here today, and Judy Julin in Watts, which is sort of based in part the school itself around Waldorf education, and it's going to be initially for very young people. So I'll give you some information about that if you want at the end. And with that, I introduce my mentee,
Hi, my name is Romeo.
So we have a practice here where I have my young people, they rise to their divinity, even though you don't have to stand there, but